Greetings. This is the Cancer Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Morton. And on this segment, we're going to do something a little bit different. Our guest is Steve Jacobsen of Ventura, California. He is a survivor of a form of head and neck cancer. And while we will be talking about his diagnosis and his treatment, much of our discussion will center on the emotional aspect of post-treatment. So against that backdrop, it's time to start. And Steve, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you, Bruce. Nice to be here.
Now, we want to start off from the same place we always start from, and that's to emphasize the fact that you, Steve, are a person and not a patient. So we'd like to know more about Steve Jacobsen, the person. So if you would tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you've done for work, and when time allows for leisure activities, what you like to do for fun, that sort of thing.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. I'm, as you said, Steve Jacobsen. I just turned 72 years old last March, and I'm probably, I best described, I was born in Chicago, but my parents moved with my sister and I to the West Coast when I was 5 years old. I grew up in Costa Mesa, went to Costa Mesa High School, Orange Coast College, Cal State Fullerton, graduated from Cal State Fullerton. I married at a pretty young age. My first marriage did not last, but I was married for 10 years and had a son and a daughter. They're both in their 40s now, and raised them in Irvine, California, which was a wonderful place to raise children. And when they were raised, I moved to Ventura when I met the lady. Her name is Dorothy. I've been with her now for 27 years, and we've been married this December. It'll be, I believe, 22 years we've been married. So that's what brought me to Ventura. And then, let's see, I had a career mostly in sales. The last sales job I had was basically selling real estate. And then I went to work and worked the last 7 years of my working years up until age 64 with the county of Ventura. I worked in human services, and I helped welfare recipients determine their continued eligibility for cash aid, food stamps, and Medi-Cal. So I met with those folks on a regular basis and analyzed whether they met the criteria to keep receiving those benefits. And that was probably one of the most interesting jobs I've ever had, because I worked with folks that were really struggling financially, and I wasn't. I never really have. So I developed a real empathy for people that struggle. And so that's basically a thumbnail sketch. I've done a lot of fun, interesting things in my life. I was an announcer in the Olympic Games when the Olympics were in Los Angeles. I've been a nightclub singer, done tremendous amount of voiceover work in the video business. I was a sales manager for a video production company. And anyway, that's just a thumbnail sketch.
Now, let me ask you about the Medi-Cal piece in this, getting people on Medi-Cal, enabling them to stay on it. And you developed an increased sense of empathy from that. From a distance, that would sound like what you were doing would be very rewarding. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. I was not the type of caseworker that just shuffled paper around a desk. I tended to listen to people and really try to understand why they were in such a financial predicament and why they were so mightily struggling to feed their children. And so I think because of that emphasis on looking at other people's challenges, I developed a real sense of empathy and compassion. And I tried to be present for those folks, and I tried to not give too much unsolicited advice, but little advice would sneak into the equation at times. But it gave me a tremendous appreciation for my own life. I'd drive home every day after work on my motorcycle and just think, oh my gosh, Steve, you are the luckiest man on the face of the earth to have the life that you have. And So that's kind of, that really helped. And then when I retired, I looked around. I spent a year not doing anything before I made a decision of what I really wanted to focus on. And what I chose to focus on was being a hospice volunteer. And I went through training, and that really, that was a tremendously interesting journey as well, Bruce, because I got to be, it was an honor to be with people and at the last stages of their life, and to share that very intimate space with them. And of course, the training that we got was, I would recommend for any human being to go through hospice training, because you really discover things about your own life and about the death and dying process. And it was a tremendous blessing to me to go through that. And it was similar to what the work I've, not that my welfare patients were dying, but in the vein of trying to help others and be present for others, it was a similar experience.
Well, in terms of hospice training, I'm sure there were things that that you could be trained to do, but you can't train empathy, and you had that, and I am guessing that, as was the case with the welfare recipients, for these hospice patients, that too had its own level of fulfillment for you.
It did. It very much did. It was sad for me to deal with people that were struggling so mightily. But what I found is, if I was just trying to be present for them, much like I tried to be present for my hospice patients, and get my own ego out of the way, and just really try to listen to them and understand their human condition and their struggles. That was a great help to me. And I suppose in some regards, it was a help to me in my cancer journey as well. Understanding my own emotions and what I was going through.
Now let's move on to your journey, and of course, cancer has not been a part of your life throughout your entire life. If you would tell us what your health was like. Your health was like before you were diagnosed.
Well, I was an athlete. I played basketball on a pretty high level in high school, college, and I fulfilled my service obligation playing for the United States Navy. And so I always considered myself an athlete. And so I saw myself as very strong. And I got lots of feedback over the years from people that knew me, how strong I was, and physically strong. Not I mean to lift, tremendous amounts of weight. I don't mean that. I mean just an overall constitution and perception of myself as being a strong man and healthy and vibrant man. So that's the way I perceived myself. And when I got the cancer diagnosis, that was totally incongruent with my own self-perception. And I imagine for everyone, it's a tremendous shock and surprise, and they process it in their own ways. But for me, it was a challenge, because I couldn't see myself as a cancer patient, and what that all meant.
Steve, and what preceded that shock? What let you know? What tipped you off that something wasn't quite right and something needed some medical attention?
I developed a lump on the side of my neck, on this right here, on this right side, and I thought it was a swollen lymph node, and indeed it was. And right away, I do probably like a lot of people do. I got on the internet, Google searched swollen lymph nodes in your neck, and discovered that all kind of discoveries, which, if you'd like, I'll go into that a little later about my perceptions of trying to become too much of a medical expert by going on these Google chases and searching your medical issues, but it did give me a sense that there could be something wrong. And of course, I had it confirmed when I went to my doctor, my general practitioner. He took a look at it and basically immediately sent me to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he looked at it and sent me for some tests. And ultimately, it was determined that, yes, indeed, the lymph node had some necrotic tissue, which is a sign that there could be dead tissue there as a result of maybe cancer. And so that began the process. I'll wait till you ask me a question, but there's something else I could share along those lines too.
Well, we had mentioned right at the top that you were diagnosed with a form of head and neck cancer. The type you were diagnosed with was what? What specific cancer were you diagnosed with?
It was called oropharyngeal cancer. And specifically what it was, Bruce, is they found cancer on the back of my tongue, where your tongue goes down by your Adam's apple, I guess. Not a part that I could open my mouth and see anything on my tongue. It was the back of my tongue. There were no feelings. I didn't have a sore throat. There was no physical manifestations of the cancer other than that lymph node. I didn't know anything was wrong with me. Just this lymph node was the only warning sign that I had. And so it was on the back of my tongue. It was also on the back of my tonsil on the right side here. So they sent me to, before I got the diagnosis, my wife and I shared notes, and we both came to the determination that this lymph node was probably a result of cancer. We had no official diagnosis, but we just kind of put our heads together and thought, well, this doesn't look very good. And so we started coming to grips with that reality. And then when I went to Los Angeles, I met with a cancer team. And by that, I mean radiation oncologists and medical oncologists to deal with the chemotherapy aspect of the treatment. And I also met with surgeons. And I was hoping, because I've had a lot of success in my life with various surgeries I've had, I was hoping they could just do a quick surgery and be done with it. And I wouldn't have to go through radiation or chemo. But that was not what I was told. I was told, no, this is not something you'd want to do a surgery to try to remedy. We're going to assign you the radiation chemo track. And they told me at the time that it was considered the gold standard for treatment for oropharyngeal cancer. So I had some solace of knowing that I was probably going to get the best treatment, but I just didn't have any idea what laid in store for me beyond that.
Now, you mentioned radiation and chemo. Was that the centerpiece of your treatment, or were there other aspects there too?
Well, there were other aspects of the treatment. For example, as I got toward the end of my 7 or 8 week regime of radiation and chemotherapy, they did that concurrently. I found that I was told by one of the radiation therapist that was administering the radiation to me, that he said one day, most of our patients seem to do really well if they have a feeding tube. And what I thought he meant by that was I thought I'd have such a tremendously sore throat, and the fact they give you this magic not mouthwash, but it has lidocaine in it. You gargle it, several times a day. And I thought that was just to deal with the horrific sore throat that I might have, and I was told I would have. When he said feeding tube, I thought, oh, okay, well, that just means that I don't have to eat for a while because my throat's going to be so sore. What they never told me is that they, meaning the radiation oncologists or the therapist that administered the radiation, nobody ever said, you might have a difficult time swallowing. And the reality for me, Bruce, was that feeding tube remained in place for 6 months. And during that 6 months, I had no idea if I would ever be able to eat food again. I couldn't watch a television commercial. I'm a big Dodger Laker fan. Every commercial is a food commercial. And of course, food is associated with so much joy and happiness and parties and, you know, good times and comfort and to think that I might not ever be able to eat or swallow again was something that was the hardest part of my cancer journey for me to get my mind around. I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. It was so difficult. And my daughter's a speech therapist, and she gave me lots of swallowing exercises to do, which I did consistently day in and day out. And I'm a pretty optimistic person, but there were times, even when I was doing the exercises and taking my little Baskin-Robbins plastic spoon of warmed apple juice and beef broth and just trying to do these various swallowing exercises, wondering if I would ever attain the ability to eat normally again. So that was probably the most difficult part of my journey. And it was for my wife too, and I can explain that a little later too if you want.
Well, Steve, this makes your story a bit unique compared to many of the others we've heard on this program, because we've had a lot of people who have gone through chemotherapy, and many of them understand afterward the justification for going through chemotherapy, because as unpleasant as it is, it kills the cancer. But if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like chemo wasn't the toughest part of your journey. It was the emotional toll taken by A, not being able to swallow, and B, wondering if you would ever be able to do it again. Is that fair to say?
To a degree, it's fair to say. I think, in retrospect, looking back, I think because the swallowing issue was such a major focus on my part, my wife's part, she wondered if she would spend the rest of her life feeding me with a syringe, and that would be part of the overall story of our lives going forward. In other words, if that would have been permanent. I think in large part, Bruce, that overshadowed and maybe distracted me from the challenges of chemotherapy and radiation in and of themselves. There's certainly, looking back, there were many challenges as it related to chemotherapy and radiation, but I was so not focused on those. My almost entire every waking minute of my life centered around, am I ever going to eat again? You know, and so I was distracted away from whatever challenges chemotherapy presented and radiation presented. Certainly chemo, I went through all the things I've read about in terms of chemo fog and, not being able to collect my thoughts and feeling like I was, not quite as mentally sharp as I've been, and just the feelings of weakness. But I had some great support along those lines. A lady that lives in back of us went through her own cancer journey with breast cancer, and she told me that one of the things that helped her was to keep moving as much as you could possibly do, even though you feel like taking a nap, you feel like sleeping most of the time because your energy is so sapped. Just keep moving, and that was probably one of the best pieces of advice I got. So even when I had the feeding tube and going through my exercises to learn how to swallow again and not knowing if I ever would eat again, I still try to walk every day, a mile and a half. I still try to go up and down the stairs as many times as I could during the day. I still tried to keep my body moving, and that was great advice, because I think that really helped me retain my strength, or as much of my strength as was being zapped from all the treatments. The constant body movement kept me physically and emotionally. It was a huge help, kept me really going.
Now, and I hope this is one of the most pleasant questions I get to ask you. How are you now? How is the state of your tongue? and your ability to eat?
I got the feeding tube removed. I got a diagnosis when I went for my first PET scan 6 months after or maybe it was 3 months after my treatment ended. I had a PET scan, and I had another one several months after that, and both PET scans revealed there's no cancer there. And I go on a regular basis to my ear, nose, and throat doctor. He puts a tube down my nose and looks, that goes into my throat, and it has a camera on it, and he shows me the pictures he takes of my throat, and there's absolutely no cancer there. And then I got the feeding tube removed, and I started very slow. I thought it would be a long process when I finally got the go-ahead to drink a liquid drink. It went down very slowly, but I was able to get it down. And then I thought that I'd have to have pureed food and go through a whole process of that. But I started with smoothies that my wife would make. She'd put every imaginable thing in it, fruit and vegetables. And she was trying to fatten me up because I had gone from 212 pounds down to 177. So I lost 35 pounds. But I kept moving. I kept trying to get those smoothies down. I even rode my bike a lot. And then one day I went to my ear, nose, and throat. And he said, he looked at my throat and he said, "I don't see any reason why you can't start eating solid foods." I said, "Really?" So I literally flew home on a cloud. I couldn't wait to tell my wife that news. She got so excited, she made some split pea soup, which is normally pretty thick. But she put it in a blender and kind of, loosened it up a little bit. And I had the whole can, and I was deliriously happy. And then the very next day, he also said, try to eat some hamburger or meatloaf or whatever. So we went to Trader Joe's and bought some Trader Joe's meatloaf. And I had meatloaf the very next night, and with some vegetables and some sweet potatoes, and everything went down. And then I was like a kid on Christmas. Every meal was an adventure. Food didn't quite taste the same. It didn't taste like I remembered it tasting. But that didn't matter. I never lost my sense of taste. But when you don't put any food in your mouth for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you're reacquainting yourself with what things taste like, there's a little bit of a learning curve there, and the brain has to get used to what things taste like again. So that was quite a journey, but from that point on, all I've had to deal with is the psychological, emotional aspects of what I've gone through.
All right, Steve, let's transition to that, because that's something that we want to talk about here, the emotional piece. And the emotional piece, I would think, would change as the roller coaster of your experience changed. So let's kind of hit the rewind button and go back to when you were first having to deal with the feeding tube, having it inserted. And you've touched on this somewhat, but let's maybe retrace some old steps and introduce some new ones. But just if you would describe what your emotions were when again, you weren't eating, and perhaps worse yet, you had no assurance that the day would come that normalcy would return. How tough was that?
Well, if somebody would have told me, given those two sets of circumstances, you're going to deal with throat cancer, Steve, and you're also going to deal with a feeding tube where you might not ever eat again. If somebody would have told me those would be the two things that I'd be served up on a platter, and told me that the feeding tube would far supersede the fear of cancer, I would have said, "You're nuts." I mean, cancer would take precedence over any of that. But it was far from the case. Like I say, the number one fear for me, and I'll mention that word fear because that's been a constant companion of mine throughout this journey. And the fear I saw what my wife, Dorothy, went through when she was trying to push these syringes, of food into me. We would sit on bar stools facing each other, and she would do it time again, and hundreds and hundreds of pushing her thumb on that whatever it's called, syringe. And then getting to a point where she developed like a inflamed tendon, and it turned, that's exactly what it was. It was an inflamed tendon from doing all that repetitive work. We thought it was maybe carpal tunnel for a while, but it was just an inflamed tendon. But for whatever reason, or whatever the diagnosis was, she had to stop doing it, and I had to do it myself. So I had to feed myself. And the other thing is with swallowing, I told you when it was at its worst, I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. I had to spit my own saliva out. And one of the big fears I had is even if I could eat again, and I kept telling myself I'm going to be able to eat again. Even though we couldn't get any doctor to tell us that would be so. All they would say is every case is different. So we ran around the medical system trying to chase some doctor that would give us some ray of hope that, I would be able to indeed eat again. It was a fruitless effort. And when I got closer to getting to the point where I thought, okay, maybe I can swallow like a liquid, food, or a smoothie or whatever, I still thought, how am I going to drink water? Because water is one of the most difficult things to swallow. You'd think it'd be easy, but my daughter's a speech therapist. She explained otherwise. Water is one of the most difficult things to swallow. And so I was living with a constant worry that even if I could regain the ability to eat, how am I going to ever drink water? So that was a constant fear. And then when I finally started eating again, and finally started to be able to get water down again, every time my wife would say, would you like this? Would you like to try this? It created an anxiety in and of itself because I didn't know if I could get that down. So, geez, I used to dream about, will I ever have a slice of pizza again, or a hot dog at a Dodger game, or, will I ever, even though, I might be able to swallow something, am I going to be able to eat some of the fun foods and comfort foods and long story short, right now, I'm eating everything. I can eat anything and everything. I have no problem whatsoever eating or drinking anything. And even had my first beer just recently. Now it's exciting.
Well, Steve, I'm kind of zigging and zagging here with the chronology because I want to talk about Dorothy's role in all of this. But before we get to that, we talked about the difficult emotional components of this roller coaster ride. But if you would, because we want these interviews to be educational and inspirational. And for somebody who's watching who may have the same type of cancer that you have dealt with, provide us with something a little bit inspirational in terms of the emotional aspects of this, and just expound upon what it was like when you found out that you could start to eat normally again.
Well, I was like a kid in a toy store or a candy store. I was deliriously happy, Bruce, and relieved at the same time. But I knew when I finally got to the point where I could get things down, that I would not. I had the answer to my biggest fears, that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life on a feeding tube, which to me would have represented a very low quality of life, and it would have made my world very small. And it just opened so many doors. But fear, as I said earlier, has been a constant companion. And I don't know whether it's, I've sought the help of therapy. But I really discovered some things about myself going when you go through something like this. I found some things about myself that I didn't know to be true prior to that. And the old adage, or the thing that's been mentioned so many times, to be able to sing the blues, you have to have experienced the blues. Well, I could probably be a pretty good blues singer right now because I spent a lot of blue and dark moments. And I realized that I'm stronger than I would have ever imagined. When you go through something like that, you go through a lot of I went through a lot of self-questioning because at times I didn't feel very strong, and I felt very weak, and I felt very dependent on Dorothy. And she got to a point where she experienced caregiver burnout, and she sought help with therapy and with some medications, and she had her own issues to deal with. And she said to me one day, "Steve, I can't do it anymore. You're going to have to handle this on your own." And that was a great shock to me. But I had so much respect and love for her and everything that I had seen her do to try to help me. And of course, we were locked up in our house during during a tough time in our history with pandemic, and so I saw how what she went through, and I encouraged her to do whatever she could to take care of herself. And I just had to turn inward and look for my own internal strength and how to move forward at that point. And I did. And I sought other sources of help. I sought a therapist. I sought help with, I did acupuncture. One of the greatest sources of help and strength for me was I had been meditating before, but I found a website called Calm, C-A-L-M. And I found two teachers on the Calm website where I listened to what's called a daily Calm. And they lead you through a guided meditation that lasts about 10 minutes each. And so that has really, I've developed a lot of internal clarity and call it wisdom into how to deal with my emotions and the fears that still accompany, wondering if the next ache or body pain is indicative of some other traumatic event that I may have to go through, and learning how to be comfortable with all of that and not let that dictate my life. And then I found this website called DARE, D-A-R-E, and DARE is an acronym for deals with how to process fear and anxiety. And D stands for disarm, A stands for accept, R stands for run towards your anxiety and not away from it. What you resist persists. And E stands for engage in life and let your fears be a part of your journey and your anxiety be part of your journey, but don't let it define your life. And there's lots of different discussions on that website that brings that focus on how to not let anxiety control who you are. I've gotten a lot of help. Certainly, what I haven't mentioned to you, Bruce, is the tremendous amount of support I've gotten from family and friends, and of course, my wife has just been the number one person in my corner, and I'm so grateful to be able to say that to you.
Now, Steve, let me ask you about the external sources of support, Calm and DARE, and you've detailed how they have helped you. To any extent, did they help Dorothy, and if so, how?
Well, I think they've helped Dorothy because she started to meditate with dealing with her own caregiver burnout issues. She started to do meditations through the Calm website, and that was really helpful for her. And And just seeing the growth in me, I think, was gratifying to her. She could see that I was handling this stuff on my own and not dependent on her for every emotional need and leaning on her too heavily, which, I probably had a tendency to do at some of my lowest points. But I think the benefit to Dorothy was seeing the clear improvement in the way I was handling and processing, all that we had been through and all that I continued to go through, even once I was eating, even once I got the clear cancer diagnosis, and, like that.
Now, just two other things we want to cover, Steve, and then we'll wrap things up here. Number one, this whole emotional component with the cancer journey, whether one has been diagnosed or whether one is a caregiver. In your estimation, would you say that, and there may be exceptions, but overall, in general, would you say that from the healthcare community that the emotional piece is overlooked and undersupported?
Well, I can't verify that. I can just look to my own experience with that. And I would say that's generally true, that the emotional, psychological components are certainly the caregivers that I dealt with are aware of what a journey that is for cancer diagnosed people. But I felt that I can just speak for my own situation. I felt that I had to look toward my own, I had to do my own siphoning and winnowing through everything that I could possibly do to reclaim my strength, reclaim my old pre-cancer attitude about life and confidence, and because I felt like I lost a lot of confidence in myself, in my physicality, and my even my ability to handle tough emotional situations.
Now, neither you nor I are in a position to make policy, but if you could write the script in terms of what the healthcare community does in terms of addressing the emotional aspect of the cancer journey, if there's anything you'd like to see that doesn't exist now, what might that be? That's
an easy one for me. When I went to Los Angeles, they told me to meet with that I was going to be meeting with the cancer team. One part of the cancer team that was conspicuously absent was a therapist and somebody familiar with the emotional components. That my wife just walked in the room. I'm going to wave at her. And that I could deal with so that I would have someone that could help me along those lines, because, like I say, I had to do my own searching within myself and outside my world for people that would help me get through this journey, because I had never been there before, as you said in early parts of this interview. I had never been there, and I hadn't known that many people in my circle that had cancer, so everything was new to me, and that would have been someone I probably, looking back on, would have relied more heavily on. I think I was trying to use the medical establishment like I would a therapist to help me deal with my own emotional challenges of where I was at and where I was going. And, they weren't equipped to do that. Doctors are scientists. They're not necessarily trained to be great bedside manner people that help you deal with what's going on, in your heart. So most of the head stuff, all the things you learn as a cancer patient is processed, but so much that goes into the heart is missing in terms of guidance and support. So yeah, if I were the one in charge, I would have that person assigned to every cancer patient that can help you walk walk through your journey that you're about to embark on, because otherwise, I don't know, you just have to figure it out for yourself.
All right, Steve, we're going to conclude, and we always conclude from the same place. And basically, the question on which we finish our interviews is this. If you had a private audience with someone who had just been diagnosed with your type of cancer or any type of cancer, and you had a message for them, what would that message be?
Well, Bruce, I would say, first of all, I would not presume that I could give that person any quote-unquote advice. If they were interested, all I could share with them is some of the things I've shared with you in this interview today. And one of the things I didn't share, and I certainly would with this person if I was talking to them, is I would say, you know, what I discovered is that I have an inner teacher, and I've had enough life experience challenges in my life to know that I'm capable of getting through a lot. And that inner teacher, I have a lot of the answers as to how to deal with things. I think the help I've sought with therapy, I just believe that a good therapist just holds up a mirror and allows you to see what you already know to be true about yourself and maybe have forgotten. Your inner strengths, your core, who you are as a human being, which cancer forces you to address. And I just would tell them that my journey was about addressing how am I going to get through all this, and return to the type of person that I knew existed before the cancer diagnosis. There's lots of help available, and I sought the help. And I think I took pretty good care of myself physically and emotionally. And I happen to be a pretty optimistic person, and that's one of the things that was really driven home during this journey. I have a really strong sense of the glass being, you know, half full. And that really helped me maneuver. I can't imagine if I were a negative person. I'll leave you with one quick anecdotal story. One of my best friends is 78 years old, and he served in Vietnam, and he got his arm blown off, and it was reattached. Basically, there was no shoulder left, and they put a bunch of hardware in his shoulder and reattached his arm, and his one arm is shorter than the other. He's had about 40 surgeries over the years and went through sheer hell on earth. He shared with me one time that he said that everything he went through when he was a year and a half in a hospital, a year and a half, and those hospitals in those days were gray walls and no pictures and no flat screen TVs. He counted, to occupy his days, he counted the drips in his IV, and he could tell you how many would occur in an hour. He identified fellow soldiers that were in this hospital over the year and a half that he was there. He identified two categories. One category was people that were just devastated by where they found themselves, and just lost complete hope and thought that things would get any better than they are right now. And he saw also a group that he identified himself as being in, and those are the ones that said, damn it, I'm getting through this, and I'm going to leave this hospital, and I'm going to have a productive, solid life going forward. And he clearly identified that the patients that didn't have that positive belief system, they were the ones that didn't make it. They were the ones that seemed to struggle more and go downhill a lot faster. And and not ever make it out of that hospital. He saw it time and again. So he was determined, even when things got really dark for him, he was determined that he was going to remain in that group that he identified as being the ones that were positive. And I can't tell you how much that story helped me. And I hope it helps somebody that just heard what I said, because every time I started to get too down, I just reminded myself, I want to be in his name is Chuck. I want to be in Chuck's camp. I want to be, and Chuck and I are also in a men's support group, and we get to share with, 2 times a month for 2 hours each time, our own interpersonal journeys and among fellow men that are on this journey together and trying to help support each other and in our walk through life. And he shared with the other fellows in our group that story and many others about what he went through. And it's, you could write quite an amazing book on biography on what Chuck went through. And just that really helped me, Bruce.
Wonderful. Steve, we've been hearing from Steve Jacobsen of Ventura, California. And Steve, I think that there is a lot that you have shared with us that can be of help to people who are confronted with a situation similar to yours. So Steve, we really want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Bruce.
And that's going to wrap up this segment of Cancer Interviews. Again, we hope that what you heard can aid the cancer journey either for yourself or for a loved one. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.